If you love Japanese-inspired gins or citrus gins with a next-level touch, you really should pay attention. The first Japanese gin was not made in Japan, but was made in England by Cambridge Distillery, one of the craziest gin projects I have ever encountered. Their search for perfection is second to none, and when someone goes to any length to perfect a gin like this, the Japanese gin, I simply had to call the man behind the madness. Hi guys, and welcome to High on Gin. Not so long ago, I introduced you to Cambridge Distillery, a high-end distillery with a sense for perfection that, well, I don't think that I have ever seen before. And if you haven't seen that episode where I reveal some of the amazing background stories about the distillery and where I test this one here, the Cambridge Dry Gin, I will link to it up here. I really encourage you to check that out before you see this episode because it really helps you understand how crazy and how uber cool this distillery is. And if you do remember that episode, you remember that Master Distiller William Lowe passed one of the most difficult exams in the world, the Master of Wine exam. And to start off our little conversation, I had to ask him why a gin producer would spend so much time and endure so many terrifying exams on wine if the purpose is to make gin. And here is what he said.
So why would a master distiller who makes gin have any interest in becoming a master of wine? That is a very fair question. It's a question I've spent a lot of years fielding. And it's a fair question, not least because the two subjects seem to be different, but also because the Master of Wine notoriously, it's one of the hardest exams in any discipline whatsoever in the entire world. Fewer than 500 people have ever passed this qualification. There are fewer than 420 living Masters of Wine on the planet as we speak. And that's not for want of trying. It is a very, very difficult endeavor. So why would I even try? Well, for the very simple reason that after almost a quarter of a century of working in wines and spirits, I've been involved in teaching at the highest levels. I used to teach the diploma spirits component for the WSET, the world's biggest wine and spirits school. And I was of the opinion that I had pretty much amassed the qualifications that it was possible to in spirits and in gin in particular. But I was not convinced that there was nothing left to learn. I was certain that I could still continue to improve. And look, even Usain Bolt has a running coach, right? Complacency is a quick way to failure. So I started studying in wine as well as spirits as a method of effectively cross-training my palate. If you ask any marathon runner, they don't practice for a marathon simply by running 26.2 miles every day. They'll do sprint sessions, they'll do yoga, they'll get in the swimming pool, they'll do stretches, they'll do weights as well. And all of this is important in creating a fully formed athlete. And I took that approach for my tasting ability, both as a consumer and as a producer. So I followed the whole Master of Wine program through to completion with the idea of creating within myself qualities which would make me a more informed and a more thoughtful and conscientious producer, as well as enabling me to better understand the requirements of a consumer. And in fact, having fielded the question, why am I doing it quite so often? For my dissertation, the final stage 3 of the Master of Wine, my dissertation actually studied empirically the effect on people's ability to taste spirits qualitatively as affected by educating them in their ability to taste wines qualitatively. So I took a group of people, measured their ability to taste both wines and spirits, taught them specifically about wine, and then measured the improvement in their ability to taste both wines and spirits, which we had not taught them about. And very long story short, to save you having to read through my dissertation, the spoiler alert here is that you can improve people's spirits tasting ability by teaching them more about wine. And I'm living proof here in Cambridge that that can have a commercial impact as well.
It is very obvious that William really does go to any length to improve his own abilities so he can improve his product, so to speak. And the gin I'm going to talk about today is the Japanese gin. And when it was introduced in 2014, it was literally the first ever produced gin only to use Japanese botanicals, besides Juniper, of course. This is the gin that opened the eyes of the world and showed why Japanese botanicals combine so perfectly with Juniper. This gin is the reason why we see so many successful Japanese-inspired gins today, and why most of them uses most of the same ingredients as William discovered work so well with Juniper. The yuzu peel, the aromatic sichu leaf, the toasted white sesame seed, and sancho pepper. And just for fun, if you have a Japanese gin, just take a look at the botanicals used in that one. I almost guarantee you that they all use one or more of these botanicals. But I guess it's a tribute to William and his hard work. So how did he come about the idea of making a Japanese gin? As always, it wasn't a coincidence or a result of a series of random tests. No. Where everything this guy does, he does for a reason. You see, William discovered the Japanese cuisine very late in life and was blown away by its balance and gracefulness and elegance. He was particularly impressed by the sichu leaf. He was convinced that all these flavors that you found in the Japanese cuisine would be perfect in a gin. So he began looking for Japanese gin. But even though he looked and searched extensively, to his surprise, he couldn't find any Japanese gin anywhere. So an idea was born. But there is more to this story. You see, William also has a degree in psychology. I think he actually has two, but that's another story. And he was very, very interested in how flavors are perceived. And in psychology, there is this phenomenon called tip of the tongue, where you go, I know this, but I can't remember from where I know it. And William saw the opportunity to create the same sensation, but through flavors. If he could make a gin entirely through Japanese ingredients, then an educated gin audience would recognize it, but without knowing why. It would have this familiarity to gin to it, and yet an exotic mysticism to it. And then at the same time, a Japanese audience that are familiar with all these flavors from the Japanese cuisine, but unfamiliar with gin, would have the same sensation, but from the opposite side of the glass, so to speak. That is why he decided to make a gin where not just a few, but all botanicals were Japanese, besides the Juniper, of course. So, in order to make a Japanese gin and still make it recognizable for the educated gin audience, William did what he does best. He brought out the nerdy professor in him and started analyzing by deciphering a normal gin recipe, so to say. The 6 most common botanicals in gin are, of course, juniper, and then it's coriander, angelica, orris root, licorice, and citrus. So he knew he had to have something to resemble these flavors in his gin. He distilled them individually and tested them and assessed them on their own merit, so he understood what they bring to a gin. And then he did something very, very clever. He did the exact opposite thing. He made 6 gins, but in each of the 6 gins, he left out one ingredient to understand what was missing when they were not there, which is different from when they are there. And that is due to this combining effect where botanicals have, where 1 and 1 equals 3, so to speak. So now, William had a very good understanding of the functional building bricks in gin, the bricks that normally makes us go, that's gin. And by having found these functional building bricks, he now knew what he had to substitute in order to create this "I know this, but I don't know from where I know this" kind of effect. That's a long word, right? Well, then he started to seek Japanese botanicals that would fill out these different roles. And the replacement of traditional citrus was, of course, easy. I mean, you just Google Japanese citrus and pop, yuzu pops up. But coming up with replacements for the other botanicals turned out to be a nightmare. He looked and he looked, he distilled and he distilled on his vacuum distillation apparatus for over a year, but he couldn't find the right Japanese ingredients for each of the other botanicals. Until one day he tumbled across Sancho pepper. He distilled it, and then he realized that this one botanical replaced the coriander and the angelica and the licorice and the orris root in one go. So now he had the toolkit and could proceed with the gin making. And much like musical notes makes up a song and various shades of colors turn into a painting, William works very deliberate with the 3 general taste notes, the base notes, the heart notes, and the top notes, as each of them are necessary to make the perfect gin. This technique is especially known in the perfume industry when making very expensive perfumes. But enough of all this talk, let's check out the result. And I asked William to take us through the taste experience. So, if you already have a bottle of Japanese gin, stop the video, grab a tasting glass, pour yourself a glass, and let him guide you through all the different flavors that you will experience. And if you don't have a bottle yet, listen to what an amazing gin awaits you. Take it away, William.
Okay, so tasting Japanese gin. Well, the first thing that we need to do when we're tasting any gin is to look at it. And it really makes me laugh that people so often forget to look at gin. We do it instinctively when we talk about wine, instinctively when we talk about whiskies or cognacs, but when we talk about gin, people for some reason just forget this step and then move straight to the nose. And I get it. I understand why. It's because the better a gin is, the less interesting it is to look at. What do I mean by that? Well, the best gins are all made through distillation. And if there is color in this glass, it means that it can not have been made entirely through distillation because color doesn't evaporate. So if you look in your glass and what you see is pink or blue or green, or if there are bits of gold flake in there, that doesn't mean it's bad, but it does mean it's not the best because it cannot have been made exclusively through distillation. And as well as being free from color, it should also be free from cloudiness. So if you look in here, this is absolutely crystal clear. If you were to add water or tonic water, it will stay crystal clear. Cloudiness in gin is a fault. So clarity is something that can and should be achieved. And no, this is not clear because it's been chill filtered. It's clear because it was distilled properly the first time. So once we've done that, we're going to move to the nose. And the easiest way of nosing any gin, really, is just to wet the inside of the glass like this and just pop it in front of your nose. You don't need any special technique here. You just breathe like a normal human being. And what you should find with Japanese gin is it's got this really elegant, very pure sensation. There's a soft, lifted green freshness in the glass, and also a slightly curious menthol spice, and that's going to become really important when we talk about the palate. So when we go on to the palate, I'm tasting here at bottle strength, which is in this instance 42% ABV. Now, what I've got in here is a combination of entirely Japanese flavors supporting that juniper note, and those flavors are shiso leaf, which is a sort of, it's like a cross between basil and mint almost. There's Sancho pepper, which gives a menthol spicy quality, white roasted sesame, and that gives that sort of oily elegance on the palate, and yuzu, which gives that ripe, zesty citrus edge. Now, some of you may not be aware of all of those flavors, so if we can all taste together at the same time, I will talk you through the flavors as you should experience them. So glasses at the ready, and with me, after 3, 1, 2, 3, cheers. So straight away, you should be getting this burst of really ripe, It's like an orange, mandarin, tangerine kind of citrus, and that is yuzu peel. We just use the zest from the outside. After that starts to give way, you're going to get a green, almost like fresh cut grass sensation. And that, my friends, is shiso leaf, one of my favorite flavors in the world. And as that starts to come down a little bit, you'll find a slightly menthol spice coming through at the back. And that menthol spice, almost pepperminty, like a peppermint and ginger, that comes from sansho pepper. It's what provides the great length and structure to this gin. You might notice I've left out white roasted sesame, and I've done that on purpose. For most people, this will be below your detection threshold, which is to say you won't actually experience the sesame as a flavor, but you will feel it. So that beautiful, soft oiliness, that mouth-coating unctuousness that comes through from Japanese gin whilst retaining elegance, that is the key role of the white roasted sesame. It all comes together, makes an absolutely beautiful, fresh, vibrant gin, and one that I highly recommend you enjoy as a dry martini. Cheers.
Believe me, guys, it is as good, as delicate, and as well balanced as it sounds. The whole concept, I know it sounds very, very nerdy, and some of us really love this nerdy part, but the end result is simply amazing, nerdy or not. Damn, this is a fine gin. So, how was it received by the Japanese people? It must have been a surprise that the first Japanese gin was released by someone not Japanese and didn't even live in Japan. I asked William.
And in fact, the thing that surprised the Japanese audience was not that it had been done. It was that it had been done so successfully. Yeah. And in fact, I received some wonderful communications from the embassy, in fact, complimenting me on very much on the fact that we had achieved not just something with Japanese character, but also something with Japanese poise and elegance. Like I've mentioned, it was not the goal here to make a caricature of Japanese cuisine. That would not achieve it. It needed to be something which was very much respectful and an homage, if you will, to the Japanese culture from a flavor perspective. So this idea that no flavor should be conceived in isolation, it should all be considered within its own ecosystem. So there's a balance involved between every element, even down to the ABV that I've used here. When I was getting this ready for bottling, we tasted blind at 0.5 degree increments over and over again until we have 3 repeated instances of blind from 40 to 45 at 0.5% increments 3 times in a row. And a randomized sample, I picked out the exact same sample, and 42% was the point at which, for me, all of this came together in a harmonious whole.
So the next obvious question is, of course, what can we expect in the future from Cambridge Distillery? Here is what William said.
Okay, so what can you expect from Cambridge Distillery in the future? That's a great question. Thank you. I think the answer, at the risk of sounding slightly contrived, would be the only thing you can expect from Cambridge Distillery next is the thing that you absolutely would not expect to happen next. I personally am just starting a PhD in the chemical engineering department of Cambridge University, specifically studying the intrinsic properties of quality in both wines and spirits. Quality is something super, super close to my heart. But fundamentally, the philosophy that drives Cambridge Distillery is that if it has already been done as well as it can be done, we're not interested. What we really dedicate our lives to here in Cambridge is that constant development, the improvement of the quality thresholds globally that gin can achieve. So we'll leave no stone unturned in that task. We're not just talking about exploring different flavors, but different philosophies, different production approaches, entirely different techniques that will find our way to discovering what the world of gin is capable of delivering.
I still have the truffle gin that I can't wait to review. A gin that is exactly what William stands for. Something truly unique and that gives us, the gin lovers, an experience beyond belief. So stay tuned for that one. And if I save all my allowances, do some more gin tasting, and find and deliver more bottles to the recycling program, one day I just might have the ability to buy the world's most expensive gin, the Cambridge Distillery Master Gin, and then tell you the story behind that one, because that is even more crazy and even more impressive. Until next time.